Will we follow our hearts or will we follow Jesus? Our convictions are never really tested until they are tested. Now, we are going to dive into a very familiar and action-packed chapter of the book of Daniel today. I mean, this chapter is the stuff that superhero movies are made of. It includes a ginormous gold statue, a narcissistic king, a very, very hot furnace, a super courageous bunch of young people, and the appearance of a supernatural being with a plot twist at the end. Now, it's action-packed from beginning to end. It's kept people intrigued for generations. But can I just say, if we're not careful, we can put this chapter in the category of like the latest Marvel movie release and read it like a fictional story instead of a true historical account. Now, the events that I'm about to read, they actually happened. The unbelievable courage of 3 teenage boys who kept their faith when it was literally under fire. This courage ended up changing the course of history. These teenage boys were pressured to compromise their faithfulness to the one true God and to conform to the cultural values, the expectations, the norms of their time, just like you and I are today. I know in all of my time on this earth, never have I felt the pull of all of the forces of our culture like I do now. I don't know of a time in my lifetime where this chapter of the Bible has had more relevance for me personally than right now. Things have changed in our world at such a rapid pace. And you know, as the Western world has become increasingly secularized and as we have moved into a post-Christian era, I think that we're going to find that this chapter of the Bible relates to us more than we ever thought it could in our entire lifetime. So some of the things you and I are facing today, we couldn't have even fathomed when we were kids, let alone the rate at which cultural, moral, and societal changes happen over the past few years. Most of us know that there are countries in the world where people have been, and are being right now, persecuted for their faith in Jesus. But those of us living in the West, we've had to face relatively little resistance towards our faith. And you and I have enjoyed incredible religious freedoms compared to many of our brothers and sisters around the world. I remember being invited to a certain country in Asia where our host had organized for 500 members of the leaders of the 4 largest streams of the underground church in China to gather together. Now, this was quite the process to have this secret gathering to ensure the safety of these leaders. For several days, I sat with different leaders and I listened to their stories of great faith and great courage, as almost every single one of them had spent time in prison and had been persecuted for choosing to follow Jesus. So, in fact, they invited me to this gathering to teach them leadership principles and how to reach young people. One of the leaders said to me, "Christine, we were never taught leadership. Most of us were uneducated agricultural workers during the revival. And the only thing we were taught was how to witness to our prison guards on the way to our execution." Now, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And it was at that point I looked at these leaders and I said, I don't know what you think I can teach you, because right now I don't feel like I've got anything to offer you. And I've got so much that I need to learn from you. And with that, I just got on my knees and I asked them to lay hands on me and to pray for me. I said that I want the fire that they carried for the gospel to be imparted to me, and that I wanted their faith, I wanted their courage, I wanted their conviction and their faithfulness to the gospel. You know, there's a fiery faith that is developed when your faith has been through the fire. And these Chinese leaders, they possessed that kind of faith. So with that, I want us to turn to Daniel chapter 3. And here we read the word of the Lord. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. Then they stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, you're going to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." Then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I've set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary, and he commanded some of his best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So these men, in their trousers, robes, head coverings, and other clothes, were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of the blazing fire. The king Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisors, "Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire?" "Yes, of course, your majesty," they replied to the king. "Look," he explained, "look, see 4 men not tied, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and called, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satraps, prefects, governors, and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair of their heads was singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb and his house made a garbage dump. For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this." Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. This is the word of the Lord. In chapter 3, verse 1, we see that King Nebuchadnezzar decided to set up a gold statue that was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and had commanded every single person to bow down and worship this image. Now, we actually know very little about the image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. No one really knows if the image was a representation of the king or of a Babylonian god or something just totally different. But whatever it was massive and it was daunting. Now, for most people in Babylon, bowing down to worship another idol, that was like no big deal, because they worshiped many gods. And this was just another one in the whole list of all of the ones that they had. Now, it's also important to know that God's people, they weren't asked to stop worshiping their God. They were just asked to also worship the gods of the culture. We read in the scripture, do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow in worship to them and do not serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. You know, it's obvious from this commandment that God was serious about his people neither making idols for themselves nor bowing down to any other idol. So these three boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they would have been aware of this commandment. Now, can you imagine the position they found themselves in? On one hand, the king for whom they worked, remember, they were in the administration. They were exiles in Babylon. This king commanded everyone to bow down to this idol that he had made. And he threatened that those that wouldn't bow down, they were going to be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Now, on the other hand, the God who they served explicitly prohibited that action. He said, you can't do this. So what do you do? What do you do when the king says one thing and God says another thing? Do you break 2 of the 10 commandments, or do you die in a furnace? These guys would have faced almost unbearable pressure to conform to the expectations of the culture around them and to obey the king's order. Idolatry is alive and well in our culture today. You know, in his book, Counterfeit Gods, Tim Keller wrote this. He wrote, an idol is something that we look to for things that only God can give. Now, that definition helps us to understand that idols are more than statues or trinkets. Anyone or anything can become an idol. Basically, when we place the value for that thing or that person above our value for God, whenever something becomes more important to us than God, then can I just tell you that thing or that person has become an idol to us. The question for us today from Daniel chapter 3 is, are we willing to take a stand for what is right? Or will we compromise to keep the status quo? Will we do what everyone else is doing even if God says it's wrong? Will we do something illegal or immoral or unethical to keep our jobs? Will we follow our hearts or will we follow Jesus? Our convictions are never really tested until they are tested. It's easy to say that we believe the Word of God and trust God until the moment that we're in a position where it's going to cost us to stand by what we profess to believe. It may not be as dramatic as it was for these 3 young men, but make no mistake, every single one of us in our generation will face the test of a fiery furnace. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments, and if you feel led, please share this video with a friend who needs to see it. Thanks so much for watching.